Hey, hello. I am Chris from Airwindows, and we're doing another Wednesday check-in. And this is going to be an interesting one if anybody shows up, because I am working on some stuff, let me tell you. So I'm going to hang around for about 45 minutes or so and show you what I'm doing. And I'm going to start by moving my windows around in the way that I usually have to do. Hey, before. Good to see you. And going over to what we call display overlay. Because we are working on meter again. So here's what's been added. I have a whole new routine in here which measures what I'm calling novelty. Now, what you might ask is novelty? A good question. I even have a meter for it, and I will quickly go to showing off what that stuff is about. See how we've got a bunch of hit records and things? And we can check them out and look at what's what and measure them without playing them over stream. And what was the one I was looking at? There's something in there that caught my eye, and I'm trying to think of which one that would be. How about Aerosmith? So what we have here is a meter, which I can't see real good because it's covering up all of my stuff, but I'm going to try to position these windows in such a way that I can do this thing. And see how it says CA hype, FF novelty, FF intensity. What that means is we're doing this calculation based on this, which is Dream On by Aerosmith. And if I play it, it's going to start decoding that using the meter, although you're not hearing it because I don't want to play it over the stream. But notice how your black line going up, that's the intensity line. It's the one that goes up to like high attention or whatever, or it can stay really, really low. And I've been figuring out what to do with these songs where I know they're massive hit songs, but the intensity meter doesn't cover them. Stuff like James Taylor's Fire and Rain. Well, this may or may not do anything because I haven't run this one before. I don't know how all of these tracks react, but I learned more than a little bit about Fire and Rain. See what the red line did? The red line is the novelty line, and it doesn't track perfectly with the other line, but they both go up to AA at the very top of the meter up here. What's happening is I am keeping track of the peak energy in the track, what we see as blue spots or black spots, and I'm feeding this information into another algorithm, and the other algorithm is keeping what I'm calling bins. It's dividing it down so that when one of these peaks hits, it sort of lights up that bin, and then it falls back based on how loud things are and whatever. It's a whole algorithm making this happen. And what makes this meter go up is when lots of these bins have all been active at the same time. So, if you had a sound that was able to make these peak indicators all the way from full crank down to silence at the same time, the red line would go through the moon. It would blow up like crazy. If you have a section like this where it's sort of jamming away and the peaks are sitting in about the same place, you see the red line diminishes. There's less novelty to the sound when we're just jamming, when it's just going. Oh, you're going to like to tape 8. That's coming this coming weekend. But then when we do something like change from this section to this section, the novelty meter goes way up. And when we start doing a bunch of different things in the track, you can have the intensity meter, the one that reads as high as like A for attention, B for bigness, so on and so forth. Hype is a factor of how much novelty is going above intensity. And I'm going to show you in a moment why that's an interesting idea, and we're going to keep running these until it's time for me to have dinner. But again, this is a little peek into what I'm working on. This is not even up on the GitHub yet. So one of the things you'll find is that the louder you make stuff, including using peak energy, you don't have any room to push for extremely large hype values, being the distinction, because you don't have enough room to do enough novelty. Again, the red line is the novelty line. If you have the band kind of grooving along doing the same thing for a long time, the novelty line will drop. It keys off of changes in the pattern of peaks, like if you have a different arrangement section, or the headphone plugin is coming too. And so what we're doing here is kind of playing through to the very end, and we see that this track went to a BC level of intensity and a BE level of novelty. So our hype factor for Aerosmith's Dream On is about CC. And so what I'm going to do is label that. I'll go and remind myself of it. CC, BE, and BC. That's what that was, yeah? Yep. So hype factor of CC, novelty factor of BE, and intensity was the highest of the lot, which is why the hype factor is lower. And then we can drag this into this collection. And this collection contains everything that I've gone through so far of all the enormous number of things that I've got here. And you'll notice that we've got many of the same things, like a lot of stuff. If everything goes to AA, like the hype in, the novelty is cranked up to the max, and also everything is loud and overwhelming, such as happens on Yes's Time in a Word album very commonly. Well, you go to a hype factor of CA. That means that those things match. And it's the same for like the Allman Brothers Whipping Post. It goes to BB for both the intensity and the novelty. And as you can see, I am measuring the hit record qualities like I have measured Come Sail Away by Styx. Come Sail Away gets much louder without having that much novelty. We've got stuff poking through here, like for instance, the track Oh Sherry is louder but doesn't have as much novelty, so it goes to a novelty factor of CC. Look at what happens when I scroll this up a bit, because we're sorting by the hype factor first. Notice that all of a sudden I've got assortment of things that weren't platinum selling top 10 hits, but we've got Fire and Rain, Hot Blooded by Foreigner, What a Fool Believes by the Doobie Brothers, Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult, Green Eyed Lady by Sugarloaf Golden Years by David Bowie. All of these are registering really high on my ranking system now. So I'm trying to make a meter that shows the way how the song is structured, or the sound is structured, make it have more of a hit record sound. I needed to figure out a reason why something like What a Fool Believes is a compelling, interesting hit. Notice we've also got other stuff way up top here. Roundabout is a huge yes hit. Well, Roundabout scores way higher on this than the album Time in a Word, even though Time in a Word goes louder. There's stuff that doesn't actually qualify, but also notice we've got Robert Palmer's Sneak and Sally Through the Alley. We've got Led Zeppelin's first track, Good Times, Bad Times. The yes track, Heart of the Sunrise, does really well here, but then so does Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer. Elton John's Benny and the Jets. Eagles' Hotel California. Hotel California is not a loud track, but it registers well using this. The idea is when you do this stuff, excuse me, you should be able to play stuff that is not over loud, where it's got a lot of space in here. The RMS can become quieter and quieter, because the higher the intensity level goes, typically the higher the RMS loudness goes as well. In order to push the peaks all the way up here, it kind of has to. But when you're not necessarily doing that, like for instance, we'll close, or we'll try to close, Dream On. And let's have a look at something that is a lot quieter than that. Let's have a look at, say, David Bowie, like, if you want, pick one. I am interested in maybe having a look at this Genesis hit. Genesis, That's All, is a big 1980s Genesis hit. Also, here is James Taylor's Mexico. That should be interesting as well. We got a heck of a lot of Steely Dan in here. And let's have a look at That's All by Genesis. And we can play that, and that's going to be a very different kind of behavior. Because what's going on here is it's real quiet. I can actually make it so that you can hear it over the speakers briefly. It's this song. And this is the 80s mix, not the 90s remix. But this is the one where Phil Collins goes, I could leave, but I won't go. It'll be easier, I know. I can't feel a thing from my head down to my toes. And then he starts belting. And on this playback, you can see how little of this is getting used. The peaks aren't even practically within the top 6 dB. You can look at the waveform down here. This is one channel of the waveform. Look at that. That is the opposite of a sausage. And yet, there is that much space in there. So what's happening is when sounds do kick in up here, that provides novelty. And the novelty hasn't really cranked up all the way like some of the louder songs do. But the novelty is cranking way up above this line. I think that the general rule of thumb for this one, and there is a lot of slew, you see that in the second meter. The second meter shows red dots where there's a lot of slew. So what's happening is we're probably settling into the solo or something. Like, yeah, we had a change in arrangement. And then we're dropping back into the same groove. The groove has a lot of space in it, which also helps with this. And we're setting up a scenario where when something else happens, it puts more energy in here. We see it's filling up the top of the energy now. And Phil starts to sing. That changes the distribution of the energy as well. And so what ends up happening is it's capable of making the novelty meter go up when something different is happening. And something different happening can even count as the beat is spacious enough that there's a lot of space inside the beat. But this also has, it's very open and spacious, but it's got lead vocals happening. And one of the things that is the result of this is we keep going into these new sections, and the new sections are making the novelty meter go up. One thing I'd like to try out is I would like to perhaps try Phil's solo track, the big do-do-do-do-do-do-do in the air tonight. Because that's the thing, is that will probably kick up novelty a heck of a lot. Although it doesn't kick up novelty immediately, but it does throw in a big arrangement change. And that arrangement change on an otherwise quiet track is going to have a very large result. And it's another DA, so it's like right next to the ones I'm looking at. So Genesis That's All is rated BA for height because of the amount of novelty that it has over the intensity. They can, in fact, go in the same direction simultaneously. They don't always have to oppose each other. The thing about it is, if the intensity line, the one that goes blue when it's really intense or green when it's like commercially capable, if that one's going up, it's probably because a lot of energy is happening in the peaks up here. And if that's a change to what's been happening, then the novelty line will go up too. We'll see how that goes. I'm going to try some further things. So BA, CB, and DB. A small change from the previous one, which is fine. And now the top 10 hit shows up like right at the top of our calculations, even though the intensity is dB. It's like way the heck down there. Let's see whether In the Air Tonight blows the top off of this meter. Hey, unknown. Let's see if it does that. Not everything does that, but it's a whole new way of calculating this stuff. Oh, and I have forgotten to close the other. Okay, so this is Phil Collins' In the Air Tonight. You can see on the meter that this is going to be quiet most of the time. And then there's a couple of noises that happen. And then this section never rises above DA intensity because it's very sparse, but it's a big change in texture. Let's see what it does. Because, of course, this is a huge hit. And my meter should be able to reveal that it's a huge hit, even if it's not going to be doing much with it right now. It's this slow, slow build. I feel that also I'll probably be able to get more out of the Steely Dan tracks. And I'm already noticing that the police hits are showing up with this novelty factor because the police were arranging things in such a way that the novelty of their tracks was quite striking. And that's the case on some of the synchronicity tracks that come across very, very quiet. In fact, I wonder whether I might see any action out of Blue Oyster Cult's Cities on Flame with Rock and Roll. that registered very, very, very low on intensity. And it's too obscure to be a really top 10 hit, but it's an enormous track. I wonder whether this is going to show that as an enormous track. So right now what we're doing is we're sort of going through the drone section. And as you can see, the red line on that starts out in the second meter, everything is so predictable. It's just a drone and a drum machine. The interesting thing about the drum machine is because it is a drum machine, it will read lower on novelty because it will go always to the same dynamic things. It's the same as if you have samples in a track. If you have samples in a track, it's going to cut down on novelty because it's not going to fire off all the same, or it is going to fire off all the same bins every time it hits. And novelty is measured by how many distinct, separate peak levels are hit at any given moment. It has to do a real scattershot approach and hit a bunch of different levels. And right now, things are sitting at such a quiet level that nothing really is lighting up the novelty meter. However, we've got some sounds coming up beyond even the singing. And you see little motions of that red line with the singing, but it's still very chill. Those voices are not really jumping out or distracting in any way. They're still blending. It's still part of the drone. But we're going to see this part where it zooms up in volume, and that's going to make the novelty meter jump up strikingly. Right here. I remember. Boom. Suddenly the novelty meter has woke up. Something new happened. The novelty meter registered the new thing happening, but that's nothing to what it's going to do when the drums kick in, because that's going to count as enormous, enormous novelty. And we might have this track registering really high. It's already waking up a little bit as Phil sings louder and louder. But here we get the startling change. And boom, off we go. And that novelty meter has gone all the way up to BE without the rest of the song changing, and it's continuing to rise. We now have a high score for hit record meter, but it's not going to stay, or at least I don't think it's going to stay, and that's because the DC intensity level is going to gradually rise a little tiny bit. So we have a meter which shows the amount of drama that happens when that part of the song kicks in. I'm pretty sure this red line is also predictive of people's excitement level as they listen to it, not knowing what's in store. It'll just start blowing up when exciting things are happening. And so now we have a track which has rated AC, which is one of the highest scores I've ever seen, for a track that I know is a monster hit record, that Ahmet Ertegun used this to intimidate people with, this track. This would be why. This would be why. It's because we're registering the amount of novelty against the background level of intensity, and it hits like a thunderbolt, and it's really startling and impressive. So let's scooch this over here so I can see what I'm doing a little bit more. And that one, AC, BC, DA. What did I say, BC? Yes, I did. That scooches up to the top, and then I drop that in my collection of greatest hits. And Simon, there's an interesting thing I can do with that suggestion too. I do have digital sourced, and that contains a bunch of things which are not like the classic hits that we're talking about. I can play you some stuff that acts differently than you might expect. Although I can also play you things like Skrillex that will just be horrible. But I'm going to show you a thing which I want to see what it does. I think it's one of our louder ones. A lot of these came across as very loud. This is all digitally sourced. But oh yeah. So check this out. And I have to close this now. So this is Dead Mouse. This is Dead Mouth's track, Bad Selection. And it registers as BE because it's so spacious. You can hear immediately that's way louder. You can see on the meter it's way louder, to the point where the reason the intensity meter is not going up that high is because it is over loud. However, the novelty meter loves it. The novelty meter is jumping right up as high as it can go, although if the intensity meter is going to gradually sneak up, it's kind of overly cranked. It's pushed kind of extra hard. And you can see how hard it's pushing, but it is also making the novelty spike out so much that it is also counting as an extremely hype track. In fact, I think it's going to spike right off the top. However, as the intensity meter gradually creeps up, it's being deceived a little bit. It is starting to contrast, so we're dropping down to a level of like AD or so, and lower still on the hype meter, because the loudnesses come and sort of take over for that. Hey Alex, I'm not going to be doing nearly as many lives, but I'm going to try to drop in on Wednesdays. And you can see it sort of dying away there. And we can stop that little test and see that the Dead Mouse track, Bad Selection, cranked right up to the max for novelty. And then the intensity started to creep up because the loudness crept up. So the height factor it ends up with is not actually one of the greatest hits of all time, but it is still quite respectable. And that's because the arrangement of this track has so much space in it that it handles it quite well, compared to, for instance, this classic Skrillex track, where you'll immediately see that the intensity doesn't actually go as high as you'd think, because it's distorting 100% of the time. And then the novelty can't do anything with this either. So it winds up just kind of average. Like, you can't make this kind of thing work terribly well with this type of over loudness. Although you'll notice that the novelty is reacting faster, but not for long. It's not getting any novelty because there is no novelty. It's just everything is constantly as loud as it can go. So this is never going anywhere from there. However, here's an interesting contrast. This is a track by Dead Mouse again. So it's another modern CD sourced thing, which doesn't follow the rules of the way that I've been doing. You might have heard of this one. It's called the Velt. So observe what this does. It's a sort of trans-modeled track, this one. So what's going to happen is the novelty is going to stay really, really low. I mean, the line goes kind of up. The very top of the meter is AA for both of them. But what this thing is trying to do, this track is designed to be a meditative state. It's not going for novelty. It's kind of going for minimal novelty. It's not throwing a bunch of changes at you. And so intensity is gradually going to rise to BE as I measured it before. But as a rule, like, novelty is going to stay very low, even as this goes higher and higher, so that the hype level is going to continue to drop. This is not really a hype song, even though you can make hit records by making stuff exciting. This one's not really following those rules, although it does have some changes in arrangement in there. Oh, and as far as the certain plugins like Clip Only 2 and so on, where they do hit that roof of 0.3, it's what I considered reasonable for a clip point using the Clip Only 2 algorithm, which is going to also suppress reconstruction overshoots, the Gib effect kind of stuff, if I think that's the correct way of doing it. But yeah, you can look at this and go, this is like a trance track, and it is continuing on, gradually getting louder and louder, but it's not actually getting different in any significant way. It's just cruising. I'm not going to have enough time for listening to a song. And so on we go with that one. That track, the Velt, it's quite loud, but that doesn't translate to novelty. Novelty stays very, very low. You can see how low it is, although it doesn't hit, the letters aren't the same for position on the screen. I honestly don't know why, but there is a striking alternative to that. And this is the band Ace of Base. And it's this 80s, 90s kind of thing. It's a CD, but this is an old CD from back before they peak limited everything. So even the brightness of it is somewhat restricted. The brightness of it is only poking up this much, even though it's coming off of a CD. And one of the things that happens with this is also the first of the like Swedish Hit Factory tracks. And you're seeing that it's following basically the same rules. It's probably not going to go that hardcore, but we're seeing that the novelty meter is still able to react. Even though it's off of a CD, it's not exactly the same. But this is directly off of that Ace of Base CD that sold in large numbers. It is a hit track. And I could even include it in my other list as well. For that matter, I could also throw in the Depeche Mode up there. Kind of scan through these and find which ones are not vinyl records, but are still indicative of something. And the thing about meter is, in fact, a meter. It's a matter of what you're trying to make happen. For instance, if you are trying to do a progressive kind of thing where there's stuff constantly happening, or this is not progressive rock music or anything like it, but it is following some of the same rules in that it's trying to throw new sounds at you all the time. Meter can't tell the difference between like wanky progressive stuff and Swedish pop music producers who are constantly trying to catch your ear. And notice that we've gone into a solo, and the solo becomes less interesting. The novelty drops way down. And then as soon as you start singing, novelty goes way up again. That is probably the correct way of doing it. And made it all the way to double A novelty, partly because the vocal is so loud that when the vocal comes in, it's an enormous difference, rather than just being nothing much going on. You notice that we've got the vocal, then we've got the chorus, but it's continued to sing. So this is the same texture over and over again. Novelty goes away. And they have to do something else in order to make anything happen. And so AD, AA, BD is how this registered. It's never quite the same. And that means this CD plunks in right there and was a top 10 hit and is sitting in the place where we have more and more hot top 10 hits in there. As long as we're still doing that. Nope, I don't have any Aphex Twin there. So let's pick something that's oh, I know. How about having a look at this Michael Sembello track, Maniac? That was a hit song. Let's see what it does. This is going to be very different because it is a 80s track, and you can see the dynamic range is very quiet. Once I might want to fool with it so that the color of the red line does something more interesting, but it'll be basically following the same behavior. And this update to meter is going to be announced probably 2 weeks from now. Although I might have it be up on the... I have to load it up onto the GitHub thing and then find out whether GitHub broke itself or still works. If GitHub still works and I can follow the same procedure I did before, then it'll be put out where people can have it. So now the question is, does this also top 10 song? Let's see where that goes. Yep, it's a top 10 hit. So does this follow the rules that I set out? In order to do that, some of the stuff it does later has to really blow the top off of the novelty meter. I don't know whether it will or not. Possibly the guitar solo will do that, or some of his arrangement stuff will do that. This is kind of the groove section, so it's not unusual that it's not spiking up to the top. However, you'll notice it is staying above the intensity line, which I think is a good sign. I think generally if the novelty line stays above the intensity line, you're probably in a good position. If it drops below, you're being repetitive or just too... like, you can't just keep doing the same thing. See, we've already heard this chorus, and so the novelty is not high. It's having the same sounds happening. And so the sounds are lighting up the same bins in the novelty meter, and stuff where it hasn't lighted that up is going dark, and so the score goes way down. As soon as he starts doing something else, like for instance this, the la 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 la, that made the novelty meter go up. Now let's see whether it recognizes when the guitar solo starts. I'm pretty sure that's a loud sound. Oh, he sang. Yep, it noticed when the guitar solo started. Although it hasn't really gone right off the top of the meter, mind you, but it has done its thing. In fact, it's continuing to be novel enough that it's holding the novelty meter fairly high up there. And my question is whether there is a parallel to how some producers cause the intensity meter to go up to a peak at the end of the song. I've seen that happen with the novelty meter. Genesis did that in one of their older tracks where they had thrown a bunch of weird variations on things at the very end. On the whole, this is counting as like basically good, but not one of the greatest tracks of all time exactly. I want to peek around in some of these and see whether I can find anything, because as you might imagine, I am attempting to go through all of these tracks again. You can tell there's a lot of work going into that. So this one rated as BBBFCE, which is slightly different from what it was before, but it's not the most predictable meter. BB, BF, and CE. Oh, interesting. Let's see now. Where is that? Here it is. Another hit record showing up on the top of my thing. Let's see what it makes of Men at Work, and then I'm going to go and have dinner. Ooh, or want to see what it makes of The Police's Every Breath You Take? I think I've investigated this before. I was going through these when I didn't have the hype meter, which is giving me this nice concentration of top 10 hits in the top of my meter, which it is intended to do. Mind you, you still get some top 10 hits lower down. For instance, stuff that like Oh Sherry is sort of a bath of 80s to sink into. You'll also notice that like Tomorrow Never Knows is a AA rated, but because the novelty meter is not very high for it, it doesn't rate as very high. Whereas if we look at, let's look at Every Breath You Take. That's a big, big hit. We can maybe see whether it registers as a big, big hit or not. I got to go through all of these at one point or another. And it'll be very interesting to see whether the ones that aren't actually hits tend to fail on the hype meter. Because they have to have extremely high novelty, which means a number of things. It means that it can't be too aggressively loud, and that there have to be either arrangement variations or texture variations in there. So again, what we're seeing with this known hit record, it's starting out without even that much variation. It's grooving, but the grooving that it's doing has so much space inside the beat that it's registering at high novelty even without throwing any changes in the arrangement. That's an interesting observation. You could aim for that kind of thing. What I'm wondering is, when it hits the chorus, is it going to blow the top off of the novelty meter? At which point it would be one of the biggest hit songs on the hype meter, because the hype meter is how much the novelty meter goes above the intensity meter. That's basically how that works. Oh, okay, we're getting there. So if it exactly stays at this, then it would be an AD hype, which is pretty darn high. I don't think it's going to stay quite there. It's already dropping a little bit because the novelty isn't able to keep it up. But I don't have a tape hiss plugin, no. So I think it's probably going to drop off a little bit. I am not sure whether the rest... Oh, no, hang on. Okay. So intensity meter reached CE, which is what this is labeled as being. And what that means is that if nothing else changes, it is attaining and keeping an AF rating for the hype factor. That puts it as one of the hugest hit songs. Oh God, this is not in consolidated. No, no, no. I can't fit it into consolidated. It would be very interesting whether the hype meter jumps up again. I doubt it. Oh, that is a song called Discord Welcome Home. It is actually findable on the internet. I mean to remix it at some point. That's a Brony song, believe it or not. Although it kind of stands on its own. You don't have to think about it as being a Brony song. So yeah, I don't know if it's going to hype any higher. I think it's not going to. I think it's done doing anything special. Although we'll let it play out anyhow. We'll let it play out and then I'm going to go and have dinner. And I'll see you guys on Sunday when I've made a video for 2Tape 8, because 2Tape 8 is coming this coming weekend. And I'll see you again on the following Wednesday when I'll do another check-in. But this has been today's check-in, and this is what I'm working on right now, is making the meter better. Actually, if you're a patron, I can drop a note to patrons when I do upload this and make it work. So, AFBD and CE, it never quite ends up being the same. It does the best it can. So AF, BD, and CE. AF, BD, and CE. And now when we put this into the big new list, and granted there are things here, although note, like The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is right up at the top. Well, that's not a multi-platinum selling album, but by God is that significant in the Genesis catalog. It's a huge deal in the Genesis catalog. And that Traffic track is just a bit of an outlier, but it's a very exciting track. You know, and there's yet another side from The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway also right up there. So you can look at this and go, yeah, that certainly seems to be finding the most commercially significant and impressive albums and hits from, look, The Police Every Breath You Take is right next to Led Zeppelin's Good Times, Bad Times, and The Heart of the Sunrise off of Yes is Fragile, and a Peter Gabriel, very popular track, Elton John, very popular track, much later Genesis, which is also a big hit. All of this stuff up here, regardless of how loud it is, has been enormously influential and a big deal. Like that Ace of Base almost started out the whole concept of Swedish pop, and numerous boy bands followed in the footsteps of this sound. And we got Foreigner, we got the Doobie Brothers, just Blue Oyster Cult, Don't Fear the Reaper. That one really got a whole lot of mileage out of the novelty factor. Have you ever heard if you listen to the unsquished and limited version of Don't Fear the Reaper, most of it is way, way, way quieter. And then when they do the little guitar part that goes and then it slams in with enormous volume, off of the record, the peak happy dynamic version of it, you can hear that the guitar solo starts out with like 5 notes. It goes, and if you don't smush all the peaks, all of those notes kind of hit you at the same time that the wall of sound hits you. The bass and drums and guitars and things just go smash. But right on top of that, the guitar solo starts with like 4 incredibly fast little notes. And it's just a mind-melting overload. And that is Blue Oyster Cult's Don't Fear the Reaper that rates as AE on the hype meter. And we're going to fill up this whole large collection of stuff with all of these things, hits or not hits. I'm looking at the hits first because I want to see whether they do this, and they certainly seem to be doing this. And we're going to see what kind of new order of hit records. You see it says new right there. We're going to see whether this produces a meter where it's tracking something that counts as how big of a hit it is. Because we're looking at all these enormous hits here, and the higher we go, the more massive they sometimes become, and we see a lot of top 10. And we see stuff that didn't even show up before, like the James Taylor track. But that made that guy. That was a huge deal for James Taylor. And the reason it's so dramatic is because it's got all those timpani in there and so on. It's a big, dramatic, hype track with a lot of good playing and singing on it. And, excuse me, I do need to go off and make dinner because I can't push myself too hard. Still gradually getting over the COVID and all. I mean, I'm over the COVID, but I have to kind of recover. This should be an interesting line of pursuit. Look to me maybe satisfying myself with the changes I've made and uploading the new version of the meter probably tomorrow or the next day. I think I could do it. I don't see any reason why not, because I'm starting to move into the whole analysis section of this and seeing whether I can make a massive hitness factor and whether it amounts to that. Like there might be huge tracks that are enormously important and influential that didn't sell top 10 hits. These ones with the red marking are the ones that were literal top 10 hits. But there's also important stuff like this. It's a Zappa track with a Moog solo and the track Peaches on Regalia, and then an encore of Tears Began to Fall off of Zappa's live 1971 record, which is considered one of the best Zappa bands that ever existed. So yeah. And program the name of tracks measuring the end of the curve of the green line. I don't know. Don't understand. When you say like green line, I don't know what you mean. Maybe you meant red line? You probably meant red line there. But yeah, what I'm doing is I'm measuring these things. The hype factor is the amount by which the novelty meter can go over the intensity meter, and that's what's producing these results where the exciting stuff is rating as high even if it's quiet. And I feel like that's really important because what I was shooting for is something that could understand why a track like Fire and Rain could make James Taylor an international superstar, and it's not a loud song. You can't measure the loudness and find out about that. You can't measure the loudness and find out like how Men at Work's Down Under was a huge hit. I'm going to be greedy and use yet another track because we're not quite done. We're going to see what Men at Work did. This was one of their perhaps their big hit, and we're going to see whether the Men at Work track produces an enormous hype factor. It should, because when I measured it last, it said that novelty went up to AF and intensity was only CE. That should produce a huge... Oh, also bear in mind, novelty lines shouldn't necessarily always increase. There's such a thing as too much for that as well. You can probably make it'll be harder work, mind you, but you can probably make a test tone that will just peg the novelty meter at all times. If you know how it works, it should be possible to make just a noise that would do it, and that doesn't make that a hit record. I suppose it's possible to even make something that will, well, actually no, hype meter means you peg the novelty meter beyond intensity a certain amount. It doesn't mean that the hype stays the same for the entire song. There's not really a factor for that. But notice that the novelty line, it does breathe, it moves. It's not about just going to the top and staying there. Intensity acts a little bit more like that, but now we know that if the intensity meter goes high enough, you can't ever have a high hype factor because it's too exhausting. This is what I was observing when I said, yeah, hit records aren't going to go above a certain intensity level. It's the amount that the novelty can go beyond that seems to translate into hit record sounding. So measuring the rate of change in the area under the red line, well, we're kind of measuring at any given moment the positioning of those two things. And the one is just the general density of stuff happening. So you probably want a lot of that, but it's not necessary. And then the change is how much all of these dots fluctuate. Remembering, of course, these are peaks. This is not RMS. This is all the stuff that people say you can't hear. People say you can't hear peaks, and it's not true. So we're measuring them. This is all from literally, none of this cares about RMS at all. None of this cares about RMS loudness at all. Like limiting would basically destroy all of these things. So the density of them, how much there is controlling the intensity. But then the degree to which it fluctuates makes different patterns. All of a sudden, like the peak is coming in a completely different place. Well, that's causing the kind of pattern that makes your ears perk up. And so the line should not increase. It should just be able to reach a very high level. If you want to let people breathe, if you want people to relax instead of be like, now I'm grooving, you want the novelty line to be low. You just probably want to be able to do things that are interesting and have stuff happen that's interesting. So here, AB, AF, and CE. So all it's got to do is add AB to that. And looky there, we now have a new biggest hit of ever. Men at Work rule the world, apparently, as far right next to James Taylor. It's going to be really fun to see what else shows up here. But one of the factors that you notice about these really high marks for the hype factor, and I mean, if you were around when Men at Work came out, yeah, they sold so many records. So many records. They're a little bit of a one-hit wonder. But oh my God, everybody has a copy of Men at Work Business as Usual. They made a lot of money selling a lot of records, as did James Taylor decades earlier. But if that seems weird, that's the song that sold I don't know how many billion records. Let me go and have a look, actually. business as usual. Men at Work album. Remember, this is the thing that I have rated as one of the most monstrous hits in the history of ever. And you might not recognize this song, and you might not know what this is. But it spent an unprecedented 15 weeks at #1. And we're going to go and look up how many platinums it got. Who Can It Be Now is also a big hit from them. There's not that many hits off of this album. Certifications. Yeah, so it went quadruple platinum in Australia, where they come from. Quintuple platinum in Canada. Sextuple platinum in the United States. That's 6 platinum records, or 10 platinum records, which I guess counts as diamond, worldwide. For mostly this one track. Mostly this one track. No. And I'll tell you why. Because we've got AA and AA for both novelty. That gives you a hype factor of CA. Yes's Time in a Word album, most of the tracks off of Time in a Word give you a CA because the loudness and intensity go to AA and the novelty also go to AA. Likewise, Beatles' Taxman goes to AC for each of those. These all count as CA because it turns out it's possible to make a bigger hit than that. Like, put it this way. I feel fairly confident in making that assessment, at least as a rough estimate, because the Yes's Time in a Word, the song, or Astral Traveler, which is an amazing track, or The Prophet, these are great songs. Go and listen to them. They're awesome. They did not sell 10 platinum. Men at Work did sell 10 platinum, and the current state of the meter rates the Men at Work track Down Under, which is what that was all coming off of. All those hits causing that result come basically off of this one track. And this one track is hitting a very high mark for novelty, an AF for novelty, while the intensity is still down at CE. I think you can probably scale both of those things up or down if you're mixing to aim for that kind of stuff. So rather than doing an AA song, you're going to probably do something along the lines of a AA, and trying to think of what it would be. It would probably be an AA, and intensity would go to CA. And that's as loud as you can get because you would need all of that space in the peak energy. Remember, AA is loud. AA is a lot of RMS volume. AA kind of blasts. It's really intense. You got to back off the RMS, the LUFS, the loudness factor to make room for the peaks. And the peaks are what we're doing for novelty, and the peaks are what are contributing to the hype. And the end result is that you can analyze things where you measure that kind of stuff, and all of a sudden the Doobie Brothers, What a Fool Believes, is an enormous hit. Well, guess what? Just like Men at Work Down Under, let me see if I can find the window that I put that in. Oh, apparently not. Fine, I'll make another. Doobie Brothers. This won't take long. Doobie Brothers, What a Fool Believes. I'm going to look at the album that it comes from. It was recorded for the album Minute by Minute. I can click on that. And it spent 87 weeks in the Billboard 200 chart. And let's look at these certifications. Yep. So, here we have Doobie Brothers, What a Fool Believes. It is only going to CC in loudness, but the album that track is on went triple platinum. And that's kind of how this stuff works. Funnily enough, I have a Noisia track hanging out, so I have clearly not gone off and made dinner for myself, and I'm going to do that pretty soon. But before I do, just so you know, and we're not going to include this in any of that stuff, I have Noisia because Noisia did one of the tracks on that Skrillex album. Noisia Scary Monsters and Nice Sprites remix. So this is pretty gruesome, but at the same time, it's not going to act the same as the Skrillex tracks because they did it kind of different. So here's what a Noisia track of Skrillex music that is, you know, it's harder than D&B. This is literally dubstep with tearing basses or whatever they're doing. You'll notice that they're not peaking all the way in the top and that they're keeping their brightness fairly well controlled. They have a huge bass in there. And this is their take on Scary Monsters and Nice Sprites. So they have a sort of more roaring, loud sounding loudness factor. And they're pushing for an extremely high intensity, and when they go into the breakdown, they've gone very Skrillexy. But this is from literally that same Skrillex album, so you might expect it. And what we see is that when they go too loud, you can't actually have enough of the novelty anymore, but their novelty went as high as BE. You can try to see where it shows up there. In fact, maybe I can skip ahead to a section that looks like it quiets down a bit. Let's see what it does here. Skipping ahead. I see in the waveform that it looks like they're doing something else. So this would be a hard Noisia track, literally off of the Skrillex album. Mostly it's too loud to make novelty happen. It's suffering from the same stuff that they get. Here's the end. Yeah, so you go this loud, you don't have the ability to put peaks across everything, although sometimes you can do interesting things with dynamics. Or not, like for instance, here's deadmau5 again, faxing Berlin, which is immediately going to click into a sort of distorty, intense thing, but because there's more space in it, it's able to get a little better as far as novelty is concerned. So that is a much quieter, well, I say quieter, I'm not sure you count this as quieter, but this is able to push a fair bit of novelty. I'm not sure whether there's a section in it. Let's click to the end where more is going on. I don't see much reaction to novelty because it's simply too loud. See, anytime the sound is as loud as this, the entire range of novelty is constricted to the top 6 dB. Nothing can happen anywhere else in it. There has to be space for peaks to happen down here in the loudness as well. And it can't. You see that the novelty starts rising as it fades to silence. And there's the Men at Work track still. And if we're going to talk modern things, why don't we talk Burial? And after that, I will go and have my dinner. So this is Burial, which I believe is off of his album Untrue. you notice an interesting thing about the early dubstep sound. We are able to get extreme novelty because there's space inside the sound. We've got a lot of really heavy bass. We're pretty much going full crank at all times. But not only is the overall sound, like you can see how much is happening throughout, but we also have textural changes. When it goes quiet over here, that's another textural change. That's going to set it up for being able to hit the loud stuff again and have it peg the novelty factor again. It's all about contrasts. And Burial was using contrasts really effectively at this time. Now, once you start getting fully loud, the ability to do novelty diminishes. And that's because so much is happening. It's filling up the space with so much sound that there's not the capacity to throw a lot of variation there. But what we're going to see as this continues to play is it's going to go into the interlude. And you see that we are already getting boosts in novelty from it going quieter. It's hanging around being a little bit more novel than some of the loud bits. And then here we are throwing the rest of this stuff in here. Again, this is able to do a lot while still being a modern track at modern loudness levels because of the arrangement. Because of the way that it'll have stuff drop out, it'll get sparser. You got the little sort of background surface noise happening. If it was constantly blasting like Skrillex, you wouldn't hear that surface noise. He leaves space for it. So those red marks are where the track is literally clipping. It's doing the thing where it literally clips, but mostly we don't see a lot of high frequencies jumping in. And it's leaving this space here. There's a lot of space for novelty in here. The bass being in there is kind of filling up a little space that it would need for doing that. But again, the hook comes back and we go to yet another height of novelty. See how high that went? So I think I'm going to play this all the way through. It's already hit the peak of intensity that it can hit. And we're going to have another enormous hit record in terms of basic influence, which I think is a legit reading. I think that is a totally legit reading. It happens to be louder than pretty much anything else I'm doing, but this originally came out as a digital file. So let's see, AC, AE, and CC. Burial's Archangel. Digital track in among all that other stuff, but it rates. And we'll build meter one final time. Quit out of Xcode. And yeah, the red line, I talked about that during this live stream, which I need to stop because I need to go and have dinner. I'll do another live stream next Wednesday. The Wednesday live streams are check-in with Chris and what I'm working on. And what I'm working on is updates to meter. And so the line is a novelty line. and it's giving me the ability to do a meter that actually registers what is a humongous hit record or not. I got a lot of work to do in order to work out whether that's actually legit, because I have to throw a bunch of non-hit records at it and see whether it fails to, yeah, you should rewind, you'll find it very interesting. I need to do all of those other tracks, which is going to take me weeks to do, in order to be able to measure whether the non-hits don't make the hype meter go up to the top. Now, the non-hits would have to, in order for those to not peg the meter, they'd have to either not have interesting changes happening all the time, in which case the novelty meter wouldn't go up, in which case the hype meter wouldn't go up. Anything where the novelty meter, the red line, is lower than the intensity, you're automatically not going to get a hit record out of it, unless there are exceptions. There may be exceptions. But this seems to be doing a pretty good job of pegging some of that stuff. And yeah, I'm finding it a very interesting development. So on that note, you're going to get 2-tape 8. I'm probably going to spend some of my time in the next couple of days making an exciting demo. Probably using that little track that I demoed console 9 with, although I am working on being able to make new tracks. DOS Putin, this would translate to what people are interested in hearing or not. And it's a work in progress. And on that note, I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.